Emma Ashby never raised her voice. Not once. Not when her father's church flooded and they lost everything they owned to the river. Not when Lady Pembridge handed her a list of duties the morning after she arrived in London, as if she had come to serve rather than to stay. Not when the women at the dinner table looked straight through her, their eyes sliding past her face the way eyes slide past furniture, acknowledging nothing, remembering nothing. Emma Ashby did not raise her voice. She watched, she listened, she learned the room. And the night the Duke of Ashford asked her name for the third time, standing in the middle of a candle-lit drawing room full of silk and pearls and women who laughed too loudly at everything he said, she made a decision. She did not answer him. She simply lowered her eyes, turned, and walked away. No one had ever walked away from the Duke of Ashford. He would spend the next 4 months understanding why that mattered. And Emma Ashby, a vicar's daughter from a village no one had heard of, in a dress she had altered twice to make it last another season, would spend those same 4 months becoming the only thing in London he could not stop thinking about. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. This is how it began. The invitation had not been for Emma. That was the first thing to understand. Lady Pembridge had been invited to the Hargrove dinner. Lady Pembridge, with her title and her townhouse and her 40 years of carefully maintained social standing. Emma had simply been included the way one includes a shawl, functional, unobtrusive, there if needed, ignored if not. Emma had known this before she even put on her gloves. She had known it when Lady Pembridge looked her over in the hallway and said, without cruelty but without kindness either, "The gray dress, then. Nothing that draws attention." She had known it when the carriage arrived, and Lady Pembridge's daughter Harriet took the forward-facing seat without a word, leaving Emma to ride backwards through the London streets, watching the city disappear rather than arrive. She had known it when they walked into the Hargrove house, and the butler greeted Lady Pembridge by name, greeted Harriet by name, and looked at Emma with a polite, practiced blankness that said everything without saying anything at all. Emma knew her place. She had been learning it for 6 months. Back in Shropshire, in her father's small parish, she had been somebody, not somebody grand, not somebody important, but somebody. The vicar's daughter who kept the accounts, who taught the younger children their letters on Tuesday afternoons, who could recite passages of Latin that would have surprised people if anyone had thought to ask. Her father had loved her with the quiet, steady love of a man who had very little to give and gave all of it. Her mother had died when Emma was 11, and after that it had been the two of them, her father and his books, Emma and her lists, the small house full of drafts and candle stubs and an enormous amount of unspoken devotion. Then her father's health began to fail. Then the letters from Lady Pembridge arrived, a distant cousin, a connection more theoretical than real, a woman who needed a companion and was willing to provide room and board and a small quarterly sum in exchange. Her father had been so relieved. Emma had smiled for him because that was what the moment required. She had been smiling ever since. The Hargrove dining room was long and bright and full of people who had known each other for decades. Emma could feel it the moment she stepped inside, the invisible map of the room, the territories already drawn, the alliances already formed, the unspoken rankings that determined who stood where and who spoke to whom and who was simply not seen at all. She found her place without being told. End of the table between an elderly gentleman who was already half asleep and an empty chair that remained empty for the entire evening. She arranged her napkin. She waited. The food came and went. Conversations rose and fell around her. Twice she was spoken to, once by the sleeping gentleman who asked if she was Pembridge's niece and then forgot the answer before she finished giving it, and once by a young woman across the table who needed the salt and did not bother learning Emma's name before or after receiving it. Emma ate. Emma listened. Emma watched. And then the door opened and the room changed. She felt it before she saw it, a shift in the air, a slight collective straightening, women's shoulders going back, men's chins lifting. Conversations did not stop, but they rearranged themselves, turning subtly toward the entrance the way flowers turn toward light without meaning to. James Hargrove, Duke of Ashford, had arrived. Emma had heard of him, of course. 6 months in Lady Pembridge's house meant 6 months of his name appearing in conversations the way weather appears, constant, unavoidable, shaping everything around it. He was 34. He was wealthy in the way that old families are wealthy, which is to say the wealth was everywhere and nowhere, embedded in the land and the walls, and the name itself rather than in anything as vulgar as a counted sum. He was unmarried, which meant half of London was holding its breath. He was said to be brilliant. He was said to be cold. He was said to be the kind of man who entered a room and immediately knew exactly how much everything in it was worth. Emma watched him greet his host, then she looked back at her plate. She was not here to look at dukes. She was here to make sure Lady Pembridge's wrap was where Lady Pembridge expected it to be at the end of the evening, and to agree pleasantly with whatever Lady Pembridge said in the carriage home, and to wake up tomorrow and do it all again. She heard him moving through the room, the greetings, the handshakes, the murmured pleasantries. He was working the dinner table the way a man works a room he has worked 100 times before, efficiently, graciously, with the particular charm of someone who has learned that charm is a useful tool rather than a genuine feeling. He reached her end of the table. He stopped at the elderly gentleman first, a warm handshake, a remembered name, a brief exchange about horses that made the old man light up. Then he turned to Emma. "Miss," he said, a pause, a polite, expectant pause. "Ashby," Emma said. "Emma Ashby." He nodded. He smiled the same smile he had given the last 7 people, measured and pleasant and entirely without content. "Miss Ashby," he said, as if repeating it, but she could already see that he was not repeating it. He was simply filling the silence before he moved on. And he moved on. Emma turned back to her plate. Around her, the table continued its noise. Lady Pembridge was laughing at something near the center, her laugh a practiced social instrument. Harriet was glowing 2 seats down from the Duke, who had not yet moved far enough away to stop being interesting. Emma ate her soup. She thought about her father's garden in Shropshire. She thought about whether she had remembered to write to him last Thursday. She thought about the book she had left open on her nightstand, a translation of Plutarch that she had found in Lady Pembridge's library, abandoned and dusty and clearly unread. She had been working through it slowly, 10 pages each night, like a small private meal she gave herself before sleeping. She thought about these things because they were real. This room, these people, this careful performance of wealth and rank and manufactured warmth, this was not real. Or rather, it was real in the way that a stage set is real. You could touch it. It existed. But it was built to be looked at, not lived in. The Duke laughed at something near the center of the table. A genuine laugh, she thought, surprised out of him, different from the social sounds he had been making. She did not look up to see what had caused it. She finished her soup. She waited for the next course. She did not think about the Duke of Ashford again that evening. Or so she told herself, in the carriage home, watching London disappear behind her in the dark. The second meeting was at Lady Weston's afternoon tea, 3 weeks later, and Emma almost did not go. She had a headache, not a serious one, the kind that sits behind the eyes and makes light feel slightly too bright and voices feel slightly too loud. The kind that, in Shropshire, would have meant an afternoon on the parlor sofa with a cold cloth and her father bringing her weak tea and asking every 20 minutes if she needed anything else. In Lady Pembridge's house, it meant nothing. "You look perfectly well," Lady Pembridge said, examining her in the hallway with the brisk efficiency of a woman checking inventory. "A little pale, perhaps. Stand up straight. Pale is acceptable. Slouching is not." So Emma went. Lady Weston's drawing room was smaller than the Hargrove dining room but felt larger, somehow, packed with women, and the particular energy of women who have been confined to drawing rooms long enough that they have turned conversation into a competitive sport. Topics moved fast. Reputations rose and fell in the space of a sentence. Emma found a chair near the window, accepted a cup of tea she didn't particularly want, and settled into the familiar work of being invisible. She was watching a sparrow on the window ledge outside, a fat, unbothered sparrow who had no idea he was sitting outside one of London's most socially significant afternoon teas, when she felt the energy in the room shift again. She didn't need to look. She knew what that shift meant now. The Duke of Ashford was here. She found this surprising. Lady Weston's afternoon teas were predominantly female occasions. The few men who attended did so as accessories to their wives or mothers, standing at the edges of rooms looking like they would rather be anywhere else. The Duke of Ashford did not seem like a man who attended afternoon teas as an accessory. She looked over, despite herself. He was standing near the fireplace, talking to Lady Weston with the same measured grace she had observed at the Hargrove dinner. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she simply hadn't been looking before. She looked away, back to the sparrow. The sparrow was gone. She drank her tea. 10 minutes passed, 15. The headache was still there, patient and persistent. Around her, women discussed a cancelled engagement, a new modiste on Bond Street, the outrageous price of everything imported. Emma contributed nothing and was asked for nothing, and this arrangement suited everyone perfectly. Then she heard footsteps stopping beside her chair. She looked up. The Duke of Ashford was looking down at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read, not quite recognition, not quite the polished blankness he'd offered at the Hargrove table. Something in between. "Miss," he said, the same pause, the same polite, expectant upward inflection. Emma felt something move through her, not anger exactly, quieter than anger, more tired than anger. "Ashby," she said, "Emma Ashby." "Miss Ashby." He settled into the empty chair beside her with the ease of a man who has never in his life sat anywhere he wasn't welcome, because he had never in his life been anywhere he wasn't welcome. "You were at the Hargrove dinner." "I was. I thought I recognized you." Emma said nothing to this. She had learned in 6 months of Lady Pembridge's company that silence was often more efficient than response. People tended to fill silence themselves, and what they chose to fill it with was usually more informative than anything she might have said. The Duke, however, did not fill the silence immediately. He sat with it for a moment, comfortable, unhurried, and she had the odd sense that he too had learned this particular skill, though he had learned it in rooms considerably grander than any she had ever occupied. "You are Lady Pembridge's companion," he said finally. "Yes. From Shropshire." He nodded slowly, as if Shropshire confirmed something he had already suspected, though what that might be she couldn't imagine. "Do you know many people in London, Miss Ashby?" "Very few," Emma said. "Mostly Lady Pembridge's." "And do you find Lady Pembridge's circle agreeable?" She looked at him then, really looked for the first time, directly and without apology. It was a slightly dangerous question. It was the kind of question that could be entirely innocent or could be something else, and she couldn't yet tell which. His eyes were darker than she'd expected. He was watching her with an attention she was not accustomed to receiving in these rooms, and she found she wasn't sure what to do with it. "I find it instructive," she said carefully. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Instructive," he repeated. "One learns a great deal by listening." "And do you listen a great deal, Miss Ashby?" "I have very little competition for it," she said. "Most people in these rooms prefer to speak." This time it was a smile, brief, genuine, the same surprised quality she had noticed at the Hargrove dinner, the laugh that had been startled out of him rather than produced. It changed his face considerably. Then Lady Weston appeared at his shoulder, requiring him for something, and he rose, and the smile went with him. And Emma was left with her lukewarm tea and her persistent headache and the strange, slightly unsettling feeling of having been, for approximately 4 minutes, genuinely seen. She did not examine this feeling closely. In the carriage home, Lady Pembridge said, without looking up from her gloves, "The Duke spoke to you." Briefly, Emma said. "About what?" "Shropshire mostly." Lady Pembridge made a sound that communicated several things at once: skepticism, mild disapproval, a warning wrapped in perfect social composure. "He is curious by nature," she said. "It means nothing. Men like Ashford notice novelty the way they notice an unusual piece of furniture, briefly, and then they furnish the room differently and forget it entirely." Emma looked out the window. "I understand," she said, and she did understand. That was the thing, she understood completely. She simply wasn't sure, for the first time in 6 months, that understanding was enough. James Ashford did not think about Emma Ashby. He told himself this with some regularity over the following 2 weeks, which should perhaps have been a sign. A man who genuinely does not think about something has no need to remind himself of the fact. He thought about his estates instead, about the tenant disputes in Derbyshire that his steward couldn't seem to resolve without him, about the vote coming up in the Lords that he hadn't yet decided how to approach, about his mother's letters, which arrived every Thursday with the reliability of bad weather and the same recurring central theme, that he was 34 years old, and the Ashford line required continuation, and she had several very suitable candidates in mind if he would only. He thought about all of these things. He did not think about a quiet woman in a gray dress, who had used the word instructive to describe Lady Pembridge's social circle, and had looked at him, just for a moment, as though she was deciding whether he was worth her attention. No one had ever looked at him that way, not once in 34 years. He found it profoundly irritating. The Dalton musicale was not something he would normally have attended. He had heard Signora Dalton perform twice before, and found her technically accomplished and emotionally exhausting. And an evening of Italian opera in a drawing room designed for 20 people that would inevitably contain 40 was not his idea of a productive use of an evening. His friend Bertram Alcott had insisted. Bertram's reasons were transparently related to a certain Miss Dalton who played the pianoforte in the second half, and had red hair and an unfortunate effect on Bertram's common sense. James had agreed because Bertram occasionally needed managing, and because he had nothing more compelling to do, and because, though he would not have said this out loud, he had found himself restless lately in a way he couldn't satisfactorily explain. The Dalton drawing room was, as predicted, significantly over capacity. James worked through it methodically, greetings, handshakes, names, the practiced business of being the Duke of Ashford in a room full of people who wanted something from the Duke of Ashford, even if that something was simply proximity. He was halfway through the room when he saw her. She was sitting near the far wall, slightly apart from the nearest cluster of guests, with a program open in her lap that she appeared to be actually reading rather than using as a social prop. Her dress was different from the gray one, dark blue this time, simply made, and her hair was arranged with a neatness that suggested care rather than extravagance, every pin doing exactly the work it was meant to do. She had not seen him yet. He watched her for a moment, just a moment, turning a page in the program with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in what was written there. There was something almost restful about it. In a room full of performance, she was simply sitting. Then she looked up and their eyes met, and for one brief second her expression was entirely unguarded. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or something more complicated than surprise. Then it closed, composed itself. She gave him the smallest, most correct nod possible and looked back at her program, James continued working through the room. When he reached her side, he stopped. She looked up again, waiting. "Miss," he began. He saw it happen, saw the exact moment, a slight stilling, something moving behind her eyes. Her chin lifted, almost imperceptibly. And then, instead of filling the pause he had left for her, instead of supplying her name the way she had supplied it twice before with perfect politeness, she said nothing. She lowered her eyes. She rose just slightly in a small half-curtsy that was entirely correct and entirely impersonal. And then she turned and moved away toward a group of women near the window, her program still in her hand, as if he had not spoken at all. James stood where she had left him. Around him, the room continued its noise. Bertram appeared at his elbow, saying something about the seating arrangements. James responded appropriately. He found his chair. He sat through Signora Dalton's performance, which was technically accomplished and emotionally exhausting, exactly as anticipated. He applauded at the correct moments. He did not hear a single note. Because he was thinking, with an intensity that was entirely disproportionate, and that he couldn't seem to reason himself out of about the exact quality of that silence, the deliberateness of it. The way she had not been rude, had not been cold, had given him nothing he could object to and nothing he could dismiss. She had simply declined to perform. In 34 years, in hundreds of rooms, no one had ever declined to perform for him. He stayed until it was polite to leave. In the carriage home, Bertram talked about Miss Dalton's red hair for the full duration of the journey. James said yes, and indeed, at reasonable intervals, and looked out the window at the dark London streets, and turned a single thought over and over in his mind like a stone he couldn't put down. He did not know her name. He had asked 3 times and he did not know her name, and she had finally, tonight, decided to stop telling him. And the part that kept him awake until 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of his very grand, very quiet bedroom, was that she was right too. The morning after the Dalton musicale, Emma woke up with the particular feeling of having done something she could not undo. Not regret exactly, something more complicated than regret. The feeling of a door that had been standing open for months that you have finally, deliberately, closed, and the click of the latch is satisfying and terrifying in equal measure. She lay in her narrow bed in Lady Pembridge's guest room, which was called a guest room but functioned as something considerably less, and stared at the ceiling and thought, well, that is done. Then she got up, dressed, pinned her hair and went down to breakfast. Lady Pembridge was already at the table, letters open beside her plate, reading with the focused displeasure of a woman who finds most correspondence beneath her expectations. She did not look up when Emma sat down. Emma poured her tea. She buttered her toast. She was reaching for the small pot of marmalade when Lady Pembridge said, still without looking up, "Lady Hardcastle wrote to me this morning." "Oh," Emma said. "She was at the Dalton musicale last night." A pause. The letter was set down. Lady Pembridge looked at Emma with an expression that had been carefully assembled to communicate concern while actually communicating something considerably sharper. "She mentioned that the Duke of Ashford attempted to speak to you." Emma took a sip of her tea. "He approached several people." "She mentioned," Lady Pembridge continued, as if Emma had not spoken, "that you walked away." The marmalade was very good. Emma focused on this, the brightness of it, the slight bitterness underneath the sweet. Someone in this house made excellent marmalade. She had never thought to find out who. "I moved to join Mrs. Alcott's group near the window," Emma said. "I had been sitting alone for some time." "Emma." The use of her first name, without prefix, without softening, landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Lady Pembridge used it rarely, and only when she wanted something to be clearly understood. "You walked away from the Duke of Ashford," she said, quietly and precisely. in a room full of people who were watching. I wasn't aware anyone was watching me particularly. Everyone is always watching particularly. Lady Pembridge folded her hands on the table, a gesture Emma had come to recognize as the prelude to something being explained very slowly, to someone being treated as younger and less intelligent than they were. You are in my house, Emma. You move in my circles by my invitation. Whatever impression you create in these rooms reflects upon me. Do you understand that? Yes, Emma said, I understand that. Good, the hands unfolded. The letter was picked up again. Then you will understand that I cannot have my companion drawing attention to herself in ways that are a pause, a careful word selection, ambiguous. Emma put down her toast. Ambiguous, she repeated. People notice when a young woman of no particular standing behaves in ways designed to attract the interest of men who are very much out of her reach. Lady Pembridge's voice was not unkind. This was almost worse than if it had been. It was the voice of a woman who believed she was being helpful, who believed she was delivering necessary information that the recipient was too inexperienced to have discovered alone. I am not suggesting your intentions were improper. I am suggesting that intentions are not the only thing that matters. Appearances matter, and the appearance last night was that I moved across a room, Emma said, a pause. That you refused to engage with the Duke of Ashford, Lady Pembridge said carefully, in a manner that several people found notable. Emma looked at her tea. She thought about her father's kitchen in Shropshire, the smell of it in the mornings, old wood and candle wax, and whatever he'd attempted to cook the night before, usually something involving too much salt. She thought about how he used to say, when she was small and something was unfair and she didn't yet have the words for why, "Tell me what happened, Emma, from the beginning, just the facts." Because her father believed, genuinely and completely, that if you laid the facts out clearly enough, the unfairness would be self-evident, that it would speak for itself. She had always loved him for that. She had always known, even as a child, that the world did not work this way. I will be more careful, Emma said. Lady Pembridge nodded, satisfied, and returned to her letters. Emma finished her breakfast. She washed her cup herself, because the habit of 6 months in this house had not yet convinced her hands to leave things for other people to clean. She went upstairs. She sat at the small desk by the window and took out the letter to her father that she had been meaning to write for 2 weeks. She got as far as "Dear Father" and then stopped. She sat for a long time, looking out the window at the gray London morning, the wet rooftops, the distant sound of wheels on cobblestones, a single pigeon standing on a chimney pot with the resigned dignity of a creature who has made peace with his circumstances. She thought about what Lady Pembridge had said. She thought about the Duke standing in the middle of the Dalton drawing room, his question trailing in the air between them, unfinished. She thought about 3 dinners, 3 pauses, 3 times she had given her name to a man who received it like something left on a hall table, noted, set aside, forgotten. And she thought, I have been careful for 6 months. I have been careful for 23 years. And this morning I am being told that one moment of not performing was an ambiguous and dangerous thing. She picked up her pen. "Dear Father," she wrote, "London is very instructive. I am learning a great deal about what is expected of women who occupy rooms they were not originally invited into. I am also learning that the expectations and the women rarely agree with each other, but that the expectations tend to win, which seems to me a considerable waste. I hope your cough is better. I will come at Christmas if Lady Pembridge can spare me. Your Emma." She sealed it before she could reconsider any of it. She would post it this afternoon. She felt, obscurely, better. James sent for his solicitor on Thursday morning, canceled the appointment when he realized he had nothing specific to discuss, rescheduled it, and then spent the intervening time at his club reading the same 3 pages of the same newspaper 4 times without retaining a word. Bertram Alcott found him there at noon and sat down uninvited with the cheerful presumption of a man who has been doing exactly that for 20 years. "You look terrible," Bertram said pleasantly. "Thank you. Not sleeping." "I'm sleeping perfectly well." Bertram signaled for coffee with the ease of someone entirely at home in other people's spaces. "Thought I might have seen you at the Dalton business the other night," he said, briefly, "before you became mysteriously absent despite being physically present, which is a skill I've always admired." James turned a page of his newspaper. "I was there the entire evening." "Your body was there. Your mind was elsewhere." Bertram accepted his coffee. "Somewhere near the far wall, I thought, approximately in the direction of Lady Pembridge's companion." James looked up. Bertram looked back at him with the expression of a man who has just placed a card on the table and is waiting, with great patience and some enjoyment, to see what happens next. "Miss Alcott played very well," James said. "She did. Her name is Miss Dalton." "Yes." "We are not related before you ask. Different Alcotts entirely." "I wasn't going to ask." "No," Bertram agreed. "You were going to change the subject." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Who is she, the companion?" James folded his newspaper, set it down. "Lady Pembridge's companion, name of Ashby, from Shropshire." "Shropshire," Bertram repeated, with the tone of a man for whom Shropshire is less a place than a concept. "Connections?" "A vicar father, nothing else that I know of." Bertram drank his coffee. "She's very still," he said finally. "Have you noticed that? Most women in these rooms are in motion, constant motion, managing their expressions, managing the room, managing whoever they're speaking to. She just sits, like she's decided she doesn't need to manage anything." James said nothing. "It's quite striking," Bertram said. "From a distance. I imagine it's even more striking up close." "You're being fanciful." "I'm being observant. There's a difference." Bertram set down his cup. "Lady Hardcastle was telling anyone who would listen that you tried to speak to her and she walked away. Half the room apparently witnessed it. Lady Hardcastle seemed to find it scandalous. Mrs. Pemberton seemed to find it funny. Old Lord Westing fell asleep partway through the telling and missed the ending." He paused. "What did you make of it?" James picked up his newspaper again. "I made nothing of it." "Right," said Bertram, in the voice of a man who has known James Ashford for 20 years and has therefore developed a comprehensive and well-tested understanding of when James Ashford is lying. He finished his coffee. He stayed for another hour. They talked about the vote in the Lords, about the Derbyshire tenant situation, about whether Bertram's elderly hunter was finally past useful work, all the normal, substantial, comfortable things that filled a morning at the club. And when Bertram left, James sat alone for a while longer. He thought about what Bertram had said. She just sits, like she's decided she doesn't need to manage anything. He had spent 34 years in rooms where everyone was managing something, including himself, especially himself. The performance of being the Duke of Ashford was so old, so practiced, so deeply built into the architecture of his daily existence that he rarely thought of it as performance at all. It was simply what he was, what he did. The competence, the authority, the measured charm, the careful distance, all of it as automatic as breathing. He could not remember the last time anyone had looked at him and simply waited, without agenda, without expectation, without performing back at him. He thought about the moment at the musicale, that fraction of a second before she composed herself, when her face had been entirely unguarded. He had seen something in it that he hadn't been able to name then and couldn't name now. He thought he might need to speak to her again. This time, he would remember her name. It started, as most things in London started, with something small. A look, a pause, a sentence left unfinished at the right moment in the right room. Emma did not witness the beginning of it. She only saw the effects, the way you only see the wind by watching what it moves. A conversation that stopped when she entered Lady Pembridge's sitting room one Tuesday afternoon. Two women near the refreshment table at Lady Farthington's gathering who turned, just slightly, just enough, when she passed. Harriet Pembridge at breakfast, watching her over the rim of a teacup with an expression Emma couldn't quite categorize, not hostile, not warm, somewhere in the complicated territory between the two. She noticed these things. She filed them away. She said nothing. Then Mrs. Alcott, Bertram Alcott's mother, a woman built entirely of good intentions and insufficient discretion, sat down beside her at Lady Weston's Wednesday card afternoon and said, with the bright, conspiratorial energy of someone delivering a gift, "My dear Miss Ashby, you are all anyone is talking about." Emma set down her cards. "I beg your pardon." "The musicale." Mrs. Alcott leaned in slightly, lowering her voice in the way that people lower their voices when they want to be overheard. "Lady Harcastle has told simply everyone about it, that you turned away from the Duke of Ashford, just turned and walked away." She clasped her hands together. "Half the women in London would have fainted from sheer proximity, and you simply walked away. People find it extraordinary." "I moved across the room," Emma said, for the second time in a week, "to join a group near the window." "Of course you did," Mrs. Alcott said warmly, in a way that made clear she did not believe this for a moment. "And now he's been asking about you, apparently, discreetly. But Bertram told me, and Bertram had it from, well, never mind where Bertram had it from. The point is, my dear, that you have managed to become interesting, which in this city is considerably more difficult than becoming beautiful or becoming rich, and you have done it entirely by accident, which makes it all the more." "I haven't done anything," Emma said. Mrs. Alcott patted her hand. "No," she agreed, "that is precisely the point." Emma drove home beside Lady Pembridge in a silence that had its own particular texture, dense and careful, and full of things waiting to be said. Lady Pembridge said them that evening. Emma had been reading in the small upstairs sitting room that was technically hers to use between the hours of 7 and 9, when the door opened and Lady Pembridge came in without knocking, which she always did, because the room was hers, the house was hers, the arrangement was hers, and Emma was a component of it rather than an inhabitant, and sat in the chair across from the fireplace with the straight-backed composure of a woman who has decided to have a conversation, and will have it efficiently. "Mrs. Alcott spoke to you today," Lady Pembridge said. "She did. About the Duke. About the musicale primarily." Lady Pembridge looked at her with an expression Emma had not seen before, something more complicated than her usual composed disapproval. Something almost, if Emma was reading it correctly, like worry. "Emma," she said, "I need you to understand something." Emma closed her book. She waited. "James Ashford is not a bad man," Lady Pembridge said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. He is not cruel, he is not dishonest, he is not the kind of man who sets out to ruin young women for entertainment. But he is," she paused, selecting the word the way she selected everything, with precision and without waste. "He is enclosed. He has been since I have known him, entirely enclosed. He allows very few people inside whatever it is he actually thinks and feels, and the people he does allow," another pause, "he has disappointed them, not intentionally, but enclosed men have a way of making the people who care for them feel the walls more than they feel the man." Emma said nothing. "Lady Celia Hargrove," Lady Pembridge said, and the name fell into the room with the weight of something that had been waiting to be mentioned. "You have heard the name." "In passing." "They were engaged 3 years ago, or close to engaged, close enough that everyone understood it to be the matter of a season. She is from an excellent family. She is accomplished, she is suitable, she is by any reasonable measure exactly what an Ashford Duchess should be." Lady Pembridge's hands folded in her lap. "It did not happen. He did not offer. He withdrew is the most accurate word, became more enclosed." And Celia waited, and then Celia stopped waiting, and now she is in Edinburgh with her married sister, and the subject is considered closed." "I see," Emma said. "I am telling you this," Lady Pembridge said, "not because I believe you have formed any particular attachment. I am telling you because you are intelligent, and intelligent women sometimes make the mistake of believing that intelligence protects them from the specific ways that men like Ashford can, without meaning to, hollow people out." The fire crackled. Somewhere below, a door closed. Emma looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about Mrs. Alcott saying, "You have managed to become interesting." She thought about Lady Pembridge saying, "enclosed." She thought about a man standing in the middle of a candle-lit room, his question hanging unfinished in the air, his face doing something she hadn't been able to name. "I understand," Emma said. "Good," Lady Pembridge rose. "There is also the practical matter." She said this as she moved toward the door, the way people say the thing they most mean when they are already leaving, so that it lands without requiring a response. If this attention, whatever it is, continues or is perceived to continue, your position here becomes complicated, not because of anything I would do, because of what the world does. You would not be the first companion who was quietly asked to leave a household because her presence had become, conversationally, inconvenient. She left. Emma sat for a long time in the small sitting room that was hers between 7 and 9. Then she opened her book. She did not read a single word of it. The letter from his mother arrived on a Friday, which was its usual day, and contained its usual contents, affectionate in tone, relentless in purpose. James read it at his desk, standing, which was how he read things he needed to process quickly and put down. His mother was well. His younger sister Charlotte was well and newly married and reportedly very happy, a state his mother described with a warmth that was genuine and a subtext that was pointed. His estates in Derbyshire were well, according to her most recent visit. The tenants in the North Field had apparently resolved their dispute, which James found mildly irritating, given that his steward had claimed this was impossible without James's direct involvement. And then, near the end, in the same flowing script as everything else, as if it were simply another piece of household news. "I understand from Lady Harcastle, who writes to me occasionally, that you have been showing some interest in a young woman of modest circumstances currently residing with Lady Pembridge. I will only say, James, that I have long believed you require someone who is not performing for you, because you are very good at seeing through performance, and it makes you tired of people quickly. Whether this particular young woman is that someone I cannot say from a distance, but I thought it worth mentioning that I noticed. Your loving mother." James set the letter down. He walked to the window, looked out at the London street below, the carriages, the vendors, the ordinary productive noise of a Friday morning. His mother had a talent, honed over 34 years of raising him, for identifying the precise thing he had not yet admitted to himself and writing it in a letter, cheerfully, between news about tenants and his sister's happiness. Someone who is not performing for you. He thought about Emma Ashby sitting at the end of the Hargrove table, eating her soup, watching the room with those quiet, recording eyes. He thought about instructive. He thought about the Dalton musicale, that fraction of unguarded expression, the deliberate and dignified silence. He thought about Celia. He thought about Celia the way he always thought about Celia, with the particular guilt of a man who knows he did something wrong, but finds the specific shape of the wrong difficult to articulate. He had not deceived her. He had not promised anything he then refused to give. He had simply found, as the months progressed, that being with her felt like being alone in a more exhausting way than being alone. That she was perfect and pleasant and entirely, hopelessly, not someone he could talk to. And that this was probably his fault more than hers, because she had tried, and he had not known how to let her. He had withdrawn. She had waited. And then she had stopped waiting, which was the only sensible thing to do, and he had felt not grief exactly, more like the confirmation of something he had already suspected about himself. That he was, at some fundamental level, enclosed. As his mother had once said, gently, after Celia left for Edinburgh, "You have always lived very far inside yourself, James. It is not a flaw, but it is a fact." He picked up his mother's letter again. Whether this particular young woman is that someone, I cannot say from a distance. He folded it, put it in the drawer where he kept his mother's letters, all of them, going back 15 years. He needed to speak to Miss Ashby, not because of his mother's letter, not because of Bertram or Lady Harcastle, or the conversation that apparently half of London was having about a woman walking across a room. Because he had something to say to her, something he hadn't managed to say in 3 meetings and 1 unfinished question. He needed to say her name. He picked up his pen. He wrote a note to Lady Pembridge, requesting the honor of calling on Friday afternoon if the day was convenient. He sent it before he could reconsider the phrasing. The response came back within the hour. Lady Pembridge would be delighted to receive him. Lady Pembridge told her at luncheon, with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they have not yet decided how to feel about. "The Duke of Ashford will be calling on Friday afternoon," she said, and buttered her bread and waited. Emma looked at her plate. "How pleasant," she said. "He has called before, occasionally. He and the late Lord Pembridge were acquainted." A pause. "He has not called in some time." "I see," Emma said. She ate her lunch. She helped Harriet with her correspondence in the afternoon. She read for an hour before dinner. She slept, eventually, after lying awake for considerably longer than she would have chosen. On Friday morning she put on the dark blue dress. Not for any reason. Simply because it was clean, and because the gray one needed pressing, and because these were the only 2 dresses she had that were appropriate for an afternoon at home, and the choice between them was entirely practical and meant nothing whatsoever. She told herself this clearly and specifically. Then she went downstairs and sat in the drawing room with her book, and waited for Friday afternoon to arrive. He arrived at 4 o'clock precisely, which was when he had said he would arrive, because James Ashford had been raised to understand that punctuality was a form of respect and lateness was a form of arrogance, and whatever else he had never been deliberately arrogant. The Pembridge drawing room was exactly as he remembered it: high ceilings, good furniture, the particular smell of a house that has been well maintained for decades without ever being truly lived in. Lady Pembridge received him at the door herself, which was a courtesy that told him she had prepared for this, that she had thought about what his visit meant, and had decided to manage it carefully. He respected this. Lady Pembridge had always been a careful woman. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing of consequence: his mother's health, the Derbyshire situation, a mutual acquaintance who had recently sold an estate in Hampshire, and whether the price was reasonable given the current state of agricultural rents. Lady Pembridge was an intelligent conversationalist, and James was a competent one, and between them they covered considerable ground without touching anything that actually mattered. He had almost begun to think that Emma Ashby would not appear at all, that Lady Pembridge, having weighed the situation with her customary precision, had decided the wisest course was to simply keep them apart, when the door opened and she came in. She had clearly not expected him to be there yet, or perhaps she had expected to find Lady Pembridge alone. In any case, she stopped in the doorway for just a moment, 1 breath, 1 blink, and then composed herself and came forward and curtsied and said good afternoon in a voice that was perfectly steady. "Miss Ashby," Lady Pembridge said, "you remember the Duke of Ashford?" "Of course," Emma said. She did not look at him directly. She sat in the chair nearest the window, at a distance that was correct and unremarkable, and folded her hands in her lap with the patience of someone who has had a great deal of practice at being in rooms where they were not entirely certain of their welcome. James watched her for a moment. Then he turned back to Lady Pembridge and asked something about the Hampshire estate, and Lady Pembridge answered, and the conversation continued. But it was different now. He was aware of it, the shift, the slight rearrangement of the room's gravity. Lady Pembridge was aware of it too, he could tell. She was managing the conversation with a fraction more effort than before, steering it, keeping it in safe territory, the way you steer a boat through water you know has rocks beneath the surface. Emma said almost nothing. She was asked, once, whether she had read a particular novel that Lady Pembridge mentioned she had, she said, some time ago. Yes, she had found it interesting, and then she returned to her silence and her folded hands and her window. After 30 minutes, Lady Pembridge excused herself with the practiced inevitability of a woman who has engineered an exit in advance, a letter that required her attention. She would only be a moment. Would the Duke care for more tea? The door closed behind her. James looked at Emma. Emma looked at her hands. The clock on the mantel made its small, steady sounds. "Miss Ashby," he said. She looked up. He had prepared nothing. He had told himself on the way here that he would simply talk to her. The way he had talked to her at Lady Weston's, for those 4 minutes before Lady Weston had appeared and taken him away. Simply and directly, without the performance. He was capable of this. He had simply forgotten, in 34 years of being the Duke of Ashford, that he was capable of it. "I owe you something," he said. Her expression did not change. She waited. "I have asked your name 3 times, he said. "I did not retain it. That was—" He stopped. The automatic word was unforgivable, which was what you said in these situations, the social word, the word that asked for absolution without really asking for it. He did not want to say it. "That was careless," he said instead, "and I am sorry for it." A pause. "You are apologizing," Emma said. Not a question, more like something she was examining from a slight distance. "I am. For not remembering a name. For treating someone as though her name was not worth remembering." Something moved across her face, too fast, too complex for him to read. She looked at her hands again. When she looked back up, her expression was composed, but there was something behind it that he thought might be the effort of keeping it that way. "It is a very common thing," she said. "In these rooms, people forget names they have no reason to remember. You had given me reason 3 times. I had given you information," she said. "Reason is different." She paused. "Reason requires the other person to decide the information is worth keeping." James looked at her for a moment. "Emma Ashby," he said, "from Shropshire. Your father is a vicar. You have been in London 6 months. You find Lady Pembridge's circle instructive. You read Plutarch." He stopped because her expression had changed sharply. "The translation in the library. Lady Pembridge mentioned it once that you'd taken it. She seemed to find it eccentric." Emma was very still. "You have been asking about me," she said. "Yes." "Why?" The clock ticked. Outside, a carriage went by, its wheels loud on the wet cobblestones. "Because," James said, "I wanted to know what I had forgotten." It was not, he was aware, a complete answer. It was not even entirely an honest one. The honest answer was more complicated, and he had not yet finished assembling it, even for himself. But it was the part of the answer he was certain of, and he gave her that part and waited. Emma looked at him for a long moment. The quiet kind of looking that he had noticed before, not performing, not managing, simply looking, as if she was reading something and taking her time with it. "I grew up," she said finally, "in a house with very few people in it. My father and I mostly. He talked to me as though what I thought mattered, as though my opinion of things was worth asking for." She paused. "I did not understand until I came to London how uncommon that was." James said nothing. He waited the way she had taught him to wait. "When you asked my name," she said, "the first time I thought, well, he will remember it now. When you asked the second time, I thought perhaps he is simply distracted, it is a crowded room. When you asked the third time," she stopped, looked at her hands, looked back up. "I realized that I had been adjusting my expectations downward to protect your feelings and that I had been doing it so automatically I hadn't even noticed. And I thought," a small pause, "I thought, no more of that." The room was very quiet. James felt something he didn't have an immediate word for. Not guilt, he had already addressed the guilt. Something else. Something that felt like the sensation of a window being opened in a room that has been closed for a long time. Slightly shocking, immediately necessary. "That is," he began. "I know it was rude," she said quickly. "At the musicale, walking away, I know how it appeared and I know what Lady Pembridge thinks of it and I know what the room made of it. I am not," she stopped, began again more carefully. "I did not do it to make a point, or not only to make a point. I did it because I had reached the end of something and I didn't know how else to show it." "It was not rude," James said. She looked at him. "It was honest," he said. "It was the most honest thing anyone has done in my presence in," he stopped, considered, "in a considerable amount of time." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then very quietly she laughed. It was not the social laugh he was accustomed to, the practiced, musical, carefully calibrated laugh of women in drawing rooms. It was small and a little surprised and entirely real, and it lasted only a moment, and then she pressed her lips together and looked away toward the window. "I think," she said, still looking at the window, that might be the saddest thing I have heard since coming to London." "Yes," James said, "I think it might be." They sat in a silence that was different from all the silences before it, not the silence of strangers, not the silence of a room full of unspoken rules, but the silence of two people who have said something true to each other and are sitting with the weight of it. Lady Pembridge returned exactly 8 minutes later. Emma rose to help with the tea things. James stayed for another 30 minutes, during which he and Lady Pembridge discussed the Hampshire estate to its natural conclusion, and Emma said 4 more words and handed him his hat when he left. In the carriage, James looked out at the London street and thought about a woman pressing her lips together to contain a laugh that was small and surprised and entirely real. He thought, "I have been in this city for 34 years and I have never once had a conversation that felt like that." He thought, "I am in considerable trouble." That evening, after dinner, after Lady Pembridge had retired and Harriet had gone to visit a friend, and the house was quiet, Emma sat in the small upstairs sitting room and did not open her book. She thought about what he had said. It was honest, the most honest thing anyone has done in my presence in a considerable amount of time. She thought about what she had said back. That might be the saddest thing I have heard since coming to London, and how he had agreed, simply and without deflection, and how that agreement had done something strange to her chest that she did not intend to examine too closely. She thought about Lady Pembridge's warning. Enclosed men have a way of making the people who care for them feel the walls more than they feel the man. She thought about Celia Hargrove in Edinburgh. She thought about her father's kitchen in Shropshire and the smell of it, and how she had not been home in 6 months, and how London had started to feel, not like a place she lived, but like a role she performed. And how this afternoon, for approximately 8 minutes in Lady Pembridge's drawing room, it had not felt that way. 8 minutes. She was not a foolish woman. She had not come to London to be foolish, and she was not going to start now. She knew what she was, a vicar's daughter in a borrowed social circle, with 2 dresses and a modest quarterly sum and no connections that mattered and no prospects that were realistic. She knew what he was. She knew what the distance between those 2 things looked like and felt like, and what it had historically done to women who forgot it was there. She knew all of this. She also knew that he had said her name, her full name, correctly, without prompting, and that something in her had gone very quiet when he did, The way things go quiet when something you have been bracing against simply does not come. She picked up her book. She read 6 pages. They were, for once, the right 6 pages Plutarch on the question of what it means to know someone, as opposed to knowing about them. Whether proximity guarantees understanding. Whether understanding requires something more than information. She read them twice. Then she closed the book, blew out the candle, and went to bed. Outside, London made its nighttime sounds, the distant wheels, the watchman's call, the rain beginning again against the window. Emma lay in the dark and told herself, clearly and specifically, that she was not in any danger. She was almost certain she believed it. The invitation came on a Tuesday. Not to Emma, to Lady Pembridge, which was, of course, the only way invitations came in this house. Lady Pembridge received them, considered them, accepted or declined them, and then informed Emma of the outcome the way one informs furniture of a rearrangement. This one was from Lady Celia Hargrove. Emma learned of it at breakfast, in the same flat, informational tone Lady Pembridge used for all domestic announcements. Lady Celia had returned from Edinburgh. She was hosting a small gathering on Thursday evening, intimate, select, the kind of evening where the guest list told you more than the occasion. Lady Pembridge had accepted. "You will accompany me," Lady Pembridge said, and returned to her eggs. Emma drank her tea. She had known this was coming. Not this specifically, not this particular evening, this particular hostess, but something like it. The city had been rearranging itself around her for weeks. She could feel it. Lady Celia's return from Edinburgh was not a coincidence of timing. Things in London were never coincidences of timing. They were moves. Careful, considered moves made by people who had been playing this game considerably longer than Emma had been alive. She thought about Lady Pembridge's warning. Enclosed men have a way of making the people who care for them feel the walls more than they feel the man. She thought about James Ashford agreeing quietly that the saddest thing she had heard in London was that honesty had become remarkable. She thought, Thursday evening. She pinned her hair and went about her day. The Hargrove house was everything the name suggested, old money made visible, every surface testifying to generations of accumulated weight and consequence. Emma walked through the entrance hall behind Lady Pembridge and felt the house looking at her the way houses like this looked at people like her, measuring, finding insufficient. Lady Celia Hargrove was at the center of her own drawing room, the way certain women are at the center of rooms, not because they demand it, but because the room arranges itself around them without being asked. She was beautiful in the particular way of women who have been told so consistently, and from such an early age that beauty has become simply a fact about them, like height or the color of their eyes. She received Lady Pembridge with warmth, received Harriet with warmth, and received Emma with a smile so precisely calibrated that Emma felt the precision of it like a temperature. "Miss Ashby," she said, "I have heard so much about you." "How kind," Emma said. She found a chair, she sat. She watched the room arrange itself. James Ashford was not there. She noticed this immediately and then spent considerable effort not continuing to notice it, which was its own kind of noticing. The room filled 20 people, perhaps 25, and he was not among them. She began slowly to release a breath she had not been aware of holding. Then, 40 minutes into the evening, the door opened. The room did its thing, the slight collective adjustment, the subtle reorientation. Emma looked at her hands. She heard him working through the room, the greetings, the handshakes. And then, because the room was not very large and there were only so many directions a man could move through it, she heard his footsteps stop. Not near her, near Lady Celia. She looked up despite herself. They were standing together near the fireplace, Lady Celia with her hand on his arm, her face turned up toward his with an expression of such practiced warmth and familiarity that Emma felt, very suddenly, that she was seeing something private, something she had no right to witness. Lady Celia was saying something low, something Emma couldn't hear, and James was listening with his face arranged in the careful composure she had come to recognize as the thing he wore when he was performing rather than present. Emma looked away. She talked to Mrs. Alcott for 20 minutes about nothing. She accepted a glass of something she didn't drink. She watched the evening proceed around her with the practiced patience of a woman who had spent 6 months learning to be invisible and had, apparently, not learned it well enough. Then Lady Celia found her. She did not do it obviously. She was far too skilled for that. She simply moved through the room with the natural ease of a hostess circulating among her guests, and she arrived at Emma's corner with a smile that was warm and a voice that was low and a manner that was so impeccably correct that there was not a single thing Emma could have pointed to, in the moment or afterward, as anything other than graciousness. "Miss Ashby," she said, settling beside her with the fluid ease of a woman entirely comfortable in her own house. "I hope you are enjoying the evening." "Very much," Emma said. "Thank you for the invitation." "Oh, Lady Pembridge must have you everywhere." A small, kind laugh. "It cannot always be very exciting for you. These rooms get rather repetitive, I imagine, after a time." "I find them instructive," Emma said, and heard the echo of herself from months ago, in a different room, saying the same word to a different person. "How lovely!" Lady Celia looked at her with an attention that was warm and direct and absolutely opaque. "You know, I have been meaning to introduce myself properly for some weeks. One hears your name rather often these days." Emma said nothing. "London talks," Lady Celia continued pleasantly. "It is the one thing it does with genuine enthusiasm." She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her skirt. "I hope you will not take this as anything other than friendly concern, Miss Ashby, because that is genuinely all it is, but I think it might be worth saying from one woman to another that this city can be a pause, a careful selection, misleading, in the impressions it creates." "In what sense?" Emma said. "The sense that attention, particularly certain kinds of attention from certain kinds of people, can appear to mean more than it does." She smiled, and the smile was so kind that Emma felt the edge of it like a blade held flat. "Men like Ashford are interested in novelty. It is not a flaw in them precisely. It is simply their nature. They notice what is different, they are drawn to it briefly, and then a small lift of the shoulders. The novelty resolves itself, and they return to what they know." Emma looked at her. Lady Celia held her gaze with perfect composure. "What they know," Emma said. "What suits them," Lady Celia said. "What fits, what makes sense." Another smile, softer now, almost genuinely gentle. "I do not say this to be unkind, Miss Ashby. I say it because no one said it to me some years ago, and I think it would have been useful." She rose. She squeezed Emma's hand once briefly, with something that might even have been real warmth. And then she moved back into her room, back to her guests, back to the fireplace where James Ashford was still standing with his careful, composed face, and his glass he wasn't drinking. Emma sat very still. She thought about Celia Hargrove waiting for a man who withdrew instead of arriving. She thought about Edinburgh. She thought about what Lady Pembridge had said enclosed, and what Mrs. Alcott had said, "He's been asking about you," and what James himself had said, "The most honest thing anyone has done in my presence in a considerable amount of time." And she thought about how all of these things could be simultaneously true and still add up to exactly what Lady Celia had described. Novelty. She looked across the room at him. He was not looking at her. He was talking to Lord Farthington about something that required a serious expression. He was the Duke of Ashford in a room full of people who had known him for decades, who understood his world and fit inside it, who spoke its language without effort or translation. And she was Emma Ashby, from Shropshire, in a dark blue dress she had now worn to every significant occasion in her London life, sitting in a corner at a party she had not been invited to. She made a decision. Not dramatically, not with the heat of anger or the blur of tears. She made it the way she had made the decision at the musicale, quietly, cleanly, with the particular clarity that comes when you stop adjusting your expectations downward and simply look at the thing as it is. She would speak to Lady Pembridge tomorrow. She would write to her father tonight. She was going home. He saw her leave. He was mid-sentence with Lord Farthington about drainage rights in the northern counties, a conversation he had been half present for at best, when he caught the movement at the edge of the room. Emma Ashby, rising from her chair, collecting herself, moving toward Lady Pembridge with a quietness that looked, from across the room, like composure, and that he knew somehow, without being able to explain how he knew it, was something else entirely. He excused himself from Lord Farthington. He saw Celia watching him do it. Her face didn't change. She was far too accomplished for that, but something in her stillness shifted, and he felt the weight of it and felt also, with a clarity that was long overdue, that he had been unfair to her. Not in the way the world generally meant by unfairness between a man and a woman, but in the specific and culpable way of a man who had allowed a situation to persist, because resolving it required a conversation he had been avoiding. He would have that conversation, tomorrow or the next day. He should have had it a year ago, but tonight he crossed the room. Emma had her back to him when he reached her. She was saying something to Lady Pembridge, low, brief. Lady Pembridge's eyes moved to him over Emma's shoulder, sharp and assessing, and then back to Emma. "Miss Ashby," he said. She turned. Her face was composed. Perfectly, completely composed, every part of it doing its job, giving him nothing he could point to, except her eyes. He had learned in 6 months of watching her without meaning to, that her eyes were slower to arrange themselves than the rest of her face. And her eyes, right now, were telling him something he did not want to receive. "Your Grace," she said. "I wonder if I might." He glanced at Lady Pembridge, who looked back at him with an expression that was not encouragement. "A moment," he said, "if you would permit it." A pause. Emma said, "Of course." They moved to the edge of the room, not far enough for privacy, just far enough that their voices were their own. Emma stood with her hands folded and her face composed and waited, and he thought, not for the first time, that she was the most patient person he had ever met, and that patience like hers was not a gentle thing. It was the patience of someone who has had no other option for a very long time. "You are leaving," he said. "The evening is getting late." "That is not what I mean." She looked at him. "Lady Celia spoke to you," he said. It was not a question. Something moved across her face. "Lady Celia is a gracious hostess." Emma, the name came out differently than it had before, not the careful, deliberate way he had used it in Lady Pembridge's drawing room, the demonstrated competence of a man proving he had learned something. This was different, shorter, less constructed. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing I hadn't already thought of myself," Emma said quietly. "Which was?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away toward the window, toward the dark London street beyond the glass, and she said, "That novelty resolves itself, that men like you return to what fits." She paused. She was not wrong to say it. It is a reasonable thing to say. Another pause. I think she said it more for herself than for me, if I am honest. But that does not make it untrue. James felt something tighten in his chest. "It is not true," he said. "You cannot know that." "I know." He stopped, started again because he had started wrong with the wrong word, the word that was about him and his certainty rather than her and what she deserved to hear. He started again. "You told me something in Lady Pembridge's drawing room about adjusting your expectations downward, about doing it automatically without noticing." He waited until she looked at him. "I have been doing the same thing, for years, telling myself that this is simply what I am, that I am enclosed. That the distance is a fact of my nature rather than a choice I keep making." He held her gaze. "You stopped making your choice. At the musicale, you stopped adjusting downward and you walked away, and it was the most clarifying thing that has happened to me in I cannot tell you how long." Emma was very still. I am not a novelty to myself, she said carefully, but I may be one to you. Those are not the same thing, and one of us cannot know the difference. No, he said, you cannot know it yet, that is fair. He held her gaze. But I am asking you not to decide it is settled, not tonight, not because of what Celia said in a corner of her drawing room. The clock on the mantel struck 10. Around them, the room continued its performance, the voices, the laughter, the whole elaborate machinery of a London evening proceeding exactly as designed. Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I am going to Shropshire for Christmas. I had already decided before tonight. A pause. I need to go home for a little while, to remember what I am when I am not performing. I understand that, he said. I will be gone 3 weeks. I know, she looked at him, you don't know. 3 weeks, he said, I will know it. Something shifted in her face. The composure held, it always held, that was its nature, but something behind it changed, the way light changes behind a window when clouds move. She said nothing. She curtsied. She moved back to Lady Pembridge. James stood where she had left him. Across the room, Celia was watching him with an expression of such careful stillness that he felt the full cost of his long avoidance settle on him at last. He would speak to her tomorrow. He owed her that, the honesty of a real conversation rather than the slow withdrawal of a man who could not face the rooms he had closed. But tonight he stood at the edge of Lady Celia's drawing room and thought about Shropshire, about a small house that smelled of old wood and candle wax, about 3 weeks that already felt very long, about a woman who had given him her name 3 times and was right to have stopped. He would not make her give it again. She wrote to her father that night. The letter was short. I am coming for Christmas. I will arrive the week before if Lady Pembridge can spare me. I have something to tell you, nothing alarming. I simply need to sit in your kitchen for a while and remember that I know what I think. Your Emma. She sealed it. She set it on the desk to post in the morning. She sat for a long time in the small upstairs sitting room. She thought about what he had said. I am asking you not to decide it is settled. She thought about the way he had said her name, short and unplanned, without the careful deliberateness of a man demonstrating competence. Just her name, as if it had come out before he had decided to say it. She thought about Celia Hargrove, beautiful and composed and giving warnings in corners of her own drawing room at her own party, and she thought that Celia was not a villain in this. She was a woman who had waited for something that hadn't come and had learned, in Edinburgh or before it, to protect herself against the particular disappointment of enclosed men. She had tried to pass that protection on. It was, in its way, a kindness. Emma simply wasn't sure she wanted it. This frightened her a little. Not the not wanting of the protection. The not wanting that had arrived underneath it, the one she hadn't quite looked at directly yet. The one that had been there, she suspected, since a man had sat down beside her at Lady Weston's afternoon tea and used the word instructive back at her like a question he genuinely wanted answered. She blew out the candle. She lay in the dark. 3 weeks in Shropshire, her father's kitchen, the smell of old wood and candle wax and too much salt, Tuesday afternoons with the village children and their letters, the church, small and cold, and hers, the river that had taken everything they owned and left them still standing. She needed all of that. She needed to stand inside the life she actually had and look at it clearly, without London pressing in on all sides, without the weight of rooms she hadn't been invited into, and rules she hadn't been taught, and a man who said her name like it had come out before he decided to say it. She needed 3 weeks. She closed her eyes. She slept. The morning of her departure, Lady Pembridge came to her room while she was packing. She stood in the doorway and watched Emma fold the gray dress into her bag with the expression of a woman selecting a word very carefully. He called yesterday, she said, while you were at the market. Emma's hand stilled on the dress. He left his card and a letter addressed to you, A pause. I have it downstairs. Emma looked at her. I did not read it, Lady Pembridge said, with a dignity that made clear this had required some effort. It is yours. She paused again, longer this time. I told him you were leaving in the morning. What did he say? Lady Pembridge was quiet for a moment. He said. She stopped, pressed her lips together, and then, with the expression of a woman revising her understanding of a situation she thought she had already understood, he said that he knew, and that he would be here when you returned. She paused. He said it very simply, as if it was just a fact. Emma looked at her hands. Pembridge, she said quietly. The name, without prefix, which she had never used before, and which Lady Pembridge received with a slight widening of her eyes. Yes. Thank you, Emma said. For all of it, the warnings, the honesty. She paused. I know it was care. I know it was always care. Lady Pembridge said nothing for a moment. Then she said, stiffly but genuinely, You are a remarkably sensible young woman, Emma, irritatingly so occasionally. Emma almost smiled. The letter is on the hall table, Lady Pembridge said, and left. Emma finished packing. She carried her bag downstairs. She put on her coat and her gloves and picked up the letter from the hall table and stood in the entrance hall of the Pembridge house in the pale December morning light. She did not open it. Not yet. She would open it on the road with the city falling away behind her and Shropshire getting closer. She would read it with cold hands and the smell of winter coming through the carriage window and no one watching. She put it in her pocket. The carriage came at 8. She did not look back at the house as she left. She looked forward, at the road, at the pale cold sky, at 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, a Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the new year, Emma Ashby walked back into Lady Pembridge's entrance hall with cold cheeks and steady hands, and something settled in her expression that had not been there when she left. She had read the letter on the road. She had read it twice. She had sat with it for 3 weeks in her father's kitchen in the cold church, on the banks of the river that had taken everything and left them standing. She had talked to her father, not about the letter, not specifically, but around it, the way you talk around the thing that matters until you find the words for it. Her father had listened with the quiet, steady attention of a man who had always believed her thoughts were worth asking for. On the last evening he had said, You already know, Emma. You've known for a while, you're just making sure. She had laughed. She had said he was probably right. He had said he usually was. She came into the entrance hall and set down her bag and unwound her scarf. Downstairs she could hear Lady Pembridge's voice, and another voice lower, steadier, a voice that had asked her name 3 times in 3 different rooms and had finally, in a letter read on a cold road out of London, explained exactly why he wanted to keep it. She stood in the entrance hall for 1 moment. She breathed. Then she went downstairs. He was standing by the window when she came into the room. He turned. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at the musicale, directly, without the performance. And then he said, simply and immediately, without preamble or decoration, Emma. Not a question, not a demonstration, not the careful work of a man proving he had learned something, just her name, in a room, said by someone who meant it. Emma stopped 3 feet from him. She looked at him, the real looking, the unhurried looking, the looking that didn't manage anything. You're here, she said. I said I would be. You did. A pause, the fire in the grate, the clock, Lady Pembridge somewhere behind her, present and very carefully not speaking. The letter, Emma said. You wrote. She stopped. I meant it, he said, all of it. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, I know, that is rather the problem. He almost smiled. The real one, the surprised one, startled out of him. Is it a problem? It was, she said. I went to Shropshire to decide if it still was. And Emma took a breath. My father says I already knew, she said, that I was just making sure. And was he right? She looked at him. This man who had taken 34 years to learn to be honest and 6 months to learn to say her name, who was enclosed and who knew it, and who was standing in Lady Pembridge's drawing room on the first Tuesday of the new year, because he had said he would be, and he was, apparently, a man who meant what he said. He usually is, she said, and the distance between 3 feet closed. 1 year later, the Ashford dinner table was long. Emma had not expected this to be the thing she noticed first in the early weeks, not the house itself, which was enormous, not the staff, who were numerous, not the weight of the name, which was considerable. She had expected all of those things and had prepared for them with the methodical practicality of a vicar's daughter who had spent 23 years preparing for things. She had not expected the table. It sat 36. She had counted. On the first evening she had walked into the dining room alone, before anyone else arrived for dinner, and stood at one end of it and counted all 36 chairs and thought about a girl who had spent 6 months sitting at the bottom end of other people's tables in a gray dress that needed pressing. She still had the gray dress. She had kept it. James had asked why once, finding it folded at the bottom of a trunk. She had said, "Because I want to remember what it felt like to wear it, so I never treat anyone the way it felt to wear it." He had looked at her for a moment. Then he had said, quietly, "That is a better reason than most people have for anything." She had put it back in the trunk. The Thursday dinners were her idea. Every Thursday, the Ashford table, all 36 chairs, was set for people who did not ordinarily sit at tables like this one. Her father came once a month, and his presence made James visibly, effortfully, determinedly on his best behavior, which Emma found privately very funny. Mrs. Alcott came and talked about Bertram's ongoing situation with Miss Dalton, which had resolved itself into an engagement, and then a marriage, and then recently, a child. Lady Pembridge came, occasionally, with Harriet, and sat very straight and ate very correctly, and once, at the end of an evening, told Emma that she was doing well, in a tone that made clear this was the highest praise available, and that she meant it completely. Lady Celia Hargrove did not come. Emma did not invite her, and James did not suggest it, and neither of them discussed this because neither of them needed to. There were some distances that were simply maintained, not out of unkindness but out of respect for what they were. Celia was in London and doing well by all accounts, and had recently been seen at several gatherings with a widower of good character. Emma wished her genuinely well, from a distance. On the first anniversary of the Thursday dinners, after the guests had gone, and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, James found Emma at the far end of the dining table. She was sitting in the last chair, the one at the very bottom, the one farthest from the head of the table. He stood in the doorway. "Emma," he said. She looked up. "I know," she said. She looked at the chair, at the long table stretching away from her, at the 35 empty chairs between this end and the other. "I sit here sometimes, to remember." He walked the length of the table. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat. They sat together at the bottom end of the Ashford dining table in the quiet house, the candles burning low, the remains of the evening still on the table around them. After a moment, James said, "Miss." Emma turned to look at him. He was watching her with the real expression, not the Duke of Ashford expression, not the public face, but the one underneath it that she had learned, over 1 year and a great many honest conversations, was the actual face of an actual man who was trying daily to be less enclosed than his nature preferred. The one he only showed her. "Ashby," she said. "Emma Ashby." He nodded slowly. "Emma Ashby," he repeated. And this time he said it the way he had always, she suspected, been capable of saying it, careful and complete, like something worth keeping. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, London made its nighttime sounds. Inside, the candles burned. The name stayed in the room long after the words were gone, held there, kept there, by the two people sitting at the bottom of a very long table who had learned, slowly and honestly and without performance, exactly what it costs to be known, and exactly what it is worth. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.